Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, robot, loin streamer, and today is book review time for the Southern Book Club's Guide to Vampire Slaying by Grady Hendrix. He is a critically acclaimed, very popular author, and I've got some thoughts. You may have seen me talk to Montana. I will link down to her channel below if you want to see our discussion on this book, but I wanted to streamline my thoughts and give it to you all as a straight, clean package. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. It's on the link tree. Number one is Lamoy, which is the monthly prompt contest here on the channel. I give you a prompt. You send in a story fulfilling the prompt and bask in your own greatness as your story is read to the masses like the prophet that you are the first Monday of every month. Yes. The second way is if you are an author of an indie book that is coming out or is out, submit your first chapter and the cover. They'll be read here on the channel to hopefully bring readers looking for your fantastic story. They will get addicted by your first page, go and actually buy the book, consume it, and wait patiently for the next one. That's the hope. So, number three, if you would like to check out any of my books, compare me to Grady Hendrix, as I'm about to. That was the book. They're available at wherever you get books and also on request at the library. So with that said, let's get into this because this is going to be a pretty long one and I don't want to waste time. I'm going to start out by saying I had such a difficulty understanding how this book is so highly praised once I got through it. I didn't go into this book hoping to, with any negative thoughts or negative opinions, because I didn't really know anything about it but the cover. And the premise on the cover seemed legit, seems like fun. Actually, I still think the cover is a fun idea. It's just too bad this book did not fulfill the premise. At this point, the cover feels like a lie. But I'm going to give you the synopsis of the story so that if you didn't read it, there's that, and that this is the stuff that I kind of pay attention to when I'm reading to show you where stuff's connecting or not connecting, and then we'll get into the commentary of everything that I generally want to say. So the novel opens with a prologue monologuing about how it ends in bloody, respectable, middle-aged housewives. This should have been the first sign of a cry for help because it read immediately to me like somebody was trying too hard to be different. Then we meet the protagonist of the novel, Patricia, a hopeless, whiny housewife getting ready to lead a book club for a book she hasn't even read yet. She's literally dead on the inside, as that's how she calls herself, and she rants about how miserable she is. Her main character traits are she doesn't meet people, so she joined a book club, and she hates everything about her life, even though there's nothing wrong with it, because she's upper middle class, her husband's a doctor, she's living comfortably, but she just can't stand it. Her book club shows up with the expectation of Patty's leadership to talk about the book, but it turns out no one in the group has read the book except for Marjorie, who is the one that picked the book. The group disperses after this blowout from discovering nobody has read the book, and Patty talks to a woman outside of the house named Kitty, who invites her to a different sort of book club that's more fun than Marjorie's stuck-up garbage book club. The difference with Kitty's book club is they focus on mostly true crime and mystery novels, not whatever that was. Moving on, Patty goes to pick up her daughter Corey from school after Corey was bullied. The bullying never comes up again, and it's not used in anything, and so I don't really know why it was put in here. Back at the house, Kitty is randomly waiting to talk to Patty outside and to give her the book for the book club. At the new book club, the women spend the first bit of time insulting their children because everyone except the woman named Slick hates their children. After a bit of exposition about the book club being started, everybody is also lying to Slick's husband about this being a Bible study club because they're super religious, and if they're not studying the Bible, the club would be a problem. After book club, Corey's worried that she's going to fail at softball, but Patty comforts her because it's just what she's supposed to do. 6 months later, a woman named Miss Mary is having reported health issues, partially dementia. This is Patty's mother-in-law. Carter, Patty's husband, argues with Patty that Miss Mary has to come and live with them because she has nowhere else to go, and he's not kicking her mother out to live on the streets. Though Patty resists, there's really no fighting it, and Carter gets his way. After Miss Mary moves in, Patty goes to the book club and complains about it. Everyone says they feel bad for her, and the next day, a nurse named Mrs. Green shows up because someone in the book club hired her for Patty because Patty is entirely useless and can't deal with her own stuff. This becomes a thing later in the finale when Patty can't even be a participant in her own climax of the novel. After a brief campfire scene, the next chapter opens with the book club ladies all saying how much they hate their children and how all mothers hate their children. When Slick interjects to say she doesn't hate her children, they all tell her to shut the fuck up. Eventually, they go to discuss Helter Skelter. This turns into gossip about who is moving into the neighborhood and how Grace catalogs the strange cars that come in just in case something happens. At the end of the book club, Patty makes a statement about how she wishes something exciting would happen because she is bored and lonely like every housewife in the suburbia. Kitty says, "Lol, don't you mean that you wish that somebody would come and kill off your family so you don't have to take care of them anymore?" The level of hatred these characters have for their own families the entire way through is astonishing to me. Patty goes home and is very disappointed and mildly resentful that her 8-year-old did not take out the garbage. She then hears her daughter talking to somebody on the phone and resents her daughter for being more popular than she was when she was that age. And then Patty goes downstairs to take out the trash because since her son didn't, she has to. She's all of a sudden getting nervous about the prospect of going outside, even though she was like, there's really no reason to be nervous about going outside. My son is kind of a pansy for not wanting to go outside in the dark. But she eventually does, and this is where she runs into a woman that we are only just now introduced to, Mrs. Savage. This woman is leaning over the garbage cans, eating the entrails of a raccoon, and when Patty flicks the light on her, Mrs. Savage, like, jumps Patty, rips off her ear, and Miss Savage is going savage. Up until Carter pulls up in his car, lights on Mrs. Savage, he rips Mrs. Savage off of Patty, and they get separated. It should be noted here that if Mrs. Savage was a vampire at this stage, this representation of vampires where she's just sucking the entrails out of a raccoon, it never shows up again because James has a little black tubey thing and delicately eats from the thighs of his victims, the inner thighs of his victims. So this is the only time we really see somebody like this. And we don't get an explanation as to what this is, how far into a transformation this is, like, what this relates to. It never comes up. And so to me, it just read like trying to do an edgy visual of a gross, covered in blood, like, old woman. But that's for the aesthetic of it, not for the anything plot related or character related. And you'll see so much of that in this book. Patty is obviously in tears, not only because her ear was bit off, but because she thinks she's going to be ugly because her ear was bit off. And her husband does the best he can to try to comfort her about not only her missing ear, but also the earring that Mrs. Savage has digested. The next morning, Carter reassures Patty that she's going to look fine and her ear is not that big of an issue and they'll get her plastic surgery. It's all going to be fine. Then he asks her to help him pick out a tie for the lunch he's going to try to get a promotion so that he can get them more money. Finally, Patty has a moment where she is not complaining, like, for once. Please. Also, please keep an eye on everything that Carter actually visibly does for these people, because the book is going to try to gaslight you that he was a terrible person. As Carter heads off to work, Patty checks on Miss Mary, and we get an exposition dump from her. Grace from the book club calls and checks on Patty about her ear. They insult Carter because the earring that she lost he didn't buy but received as a gift from a patient. And they're like, well, that's cheap, even if they were not cheap earrings. Just because he didn't buy them. Clear trash talk. It really doesn't matter. Slick also calls to check out on Patty while informing her that Mrs. Savage has passed away and there will be no funeral. Even though Patty didn't like or communicate with Mrs. Savage or her family, she wants to do something like take them a casserole for condolences. So she brings over a condolence casserole that she got because her earlobe was missing. When she arrives at the house, no one answers, so she lets herself in. There are two reasons that this doesn't make any sense. Number one, the person staying there is from out of town and recently moved in, so even if the neighborhood was very trusting to the point that they left their doors locked, the current guest is not from that neighborhood or culture, so why would he trust the neighborhood he is very foreign to? Number two, the person there is James, who we will later learn is a vampire. He is insanely vulnerable while sleeping. He is underfed to the point that he can't go in the sun right now. It visibly shows as a health issue for him. But he left the door unlocked while he is entirely vulnerable? Really? Grady, come on. So Patty walks through the house looking for anyone to give the casserole to when she stumbles upon this handsome stranger that she doesn't recognize laying in a bed. He looks so dead that she gives him CPR. But it should also be noted that even though he looks like that, one of the first things she notes about him is how hot he looks. He wakes up and tosses Patty out of the house because she shouldn't have been there. She snuck in. She walks out seeing some woman named Francine pull up. There's no description of who Francine is or how Patty knows her. She's just pulling up. And for a while, I thought Francine was a relative to the dead Savage. We later find out that this is the cleaning lady, but only when they're talking about her after she's missing. Right here, we have literally no idea of who she is or how she relates to anybody. After Patty returns home, she's worried about people in the neighborhood gossiping about how she gave CPR to this new guy in the block, but nobody talks about her. Because Patty is just like a busybody, apparently. Eventually, Patty and her family are sitting down at dinner when the doorbell rings and the man from Mrs. Savage's house, her assumed nephew, introduces himself as James Harris. Throughout the book, he will always be James Harris. He's returning the casserole dish that Patty had brought over. Patty invites him to come and meet the family. As this goes, Patty is clearly wet for the stranger because he is clearly the only new and exciting thing in her life. Miss Mary then has a lapse or something and starts screaming that James is the man from her past and he's not going to get away with what he did to her family. Miss Mary is then put to bed, James is seen out, and Carter is cold and pissed off because his wife was literally flirting with another man in front of him and the kids at dinner. Like, Patty, what are you doing with your life? I can't believe you flirted with a stranger in front of your husband the first time you invited him in. I also can't believe how kind Carter is that he later becomes friends with James after you did this to him with James. The next day, Patty goes to see James and learns that he is physically weak and needs help setting himself up in this new town. He gets Patty to help him and co-sign for a bank account, get an ID, and get utilities to his house. Patty likes spending time around James because he keeps complimenting her and it makes her feel like she did when she first married Carter. This feels like a whole bunch of cliches that aren't actually going to come into play because he doesn't actually try to charm Patty, so I don't know why it tried to play this thing of, oh, he's just a younger man that's better than my husband. We're not actually going there. I don't know if that was a first draft direction of consideration that didn't get revisited because there was obviously no revision here, or if it was a purposeful red herring. Then we time skip through the summer with chores and responsibilities and the AC running. Forgot to mention that when Patty was helping James set up his house, she also invited him to the book club. So now that it is summer and it's the first time the book club is meeting, James is going to show up. In the month since then, Patty did not tell anybody in the book club that she invited James, and even as she gets to the book club and realizes she didn't tell anybody, she still doesn't stop to be like, oh, hey guys, by the way, sorry for the short notice, but I told James that he could come. Is that okay? Okay, good, because I already told him. She doesn't even do that. She just lets James show up and then lets the shit hit the fan. Because Patty is so useless. It's not because she's a housewife, it's because she's Patty. When James shows up, the group learns that James is unmarried, has no kids, no family. They complain about their kids again, judge him by the books he reads, and Kitty complains about her husband. Slick boasts about how amazing gated communities are. Mary Ellen is pissed about the book that they read, mostly because Slick picked it, and the group really hates everything that has to do with Slick. It's also a book that romanticizes adultery relationships, though Mary Ellen partially tries to associate it with serial killing, even though there's none of that in it. It's just the fact that romantic lead is an unattached male that makes her go, this has to be a serial killer. Mary Ellen continues to complain because the lead in the book is a man and she doesn't want to read books that are about leading men. I don't know how she is a husband. Miss Mary interrupts the book club by walking into the room butt naked, and I'm not sure how or why this happened because Miss Green was supposed to be giving her a bath. There were no sounds of fighting to make it clear that Miss Green was struggling with her, which just leaves me to believe that Miss Green left Miss Mary in the bathtub alone and walked away, which is also like, what the frick? Because this is a very sensitive, very depleted dementia patient, basically. She is detached from reality, and you just left her in a bathtub in which she could drown. What are you being paid for? And the dementia-ridden woman then starts yelling at James about who he is and that she's got a picture to prove that he is who she says he is, that ruined her life and her grandpa's life or her father's life 50, 60 years ago. She knows him, and she is going to expose him. Patty grabs Miss Mary and puts her to bed, and when she comes back, everybody has just bailed on the book club. Yet, pretty immediately after everybody is bailed, Grace calls to tell Patty that the book club was fine, and she blames the book for how bad the night went. Just don't worry about it. She also takes a chance to take shots at James for no apparent reason, because he didn't say anything contrary in the book club at all, but Grace just has to say, men have no idea what it's like to take care of a loved one. None of you acted with compassion either. You literally all bailed instead of waiting for Patty to come back and then comforting her. So, like, who do you think you are? I don't understand what this is trying to do with these characters. After the phone call, Patty is uncomfortable being downstairs alone, so she goes upstairs randomly to knock on her daughter's door. This happens just so Corey can drop the next spooky plot element, which is that she heard a man on the roof and thought that she saw something outside. Patty dismisses this as Corey's imagination, since she's reading spooky books and Salem's Lot is on her nightstand. She then goes and knocks on her son's door, and he repeats what Corey said. He too is dismissed. It's only when Patty also hears the sound of somebody on the roof that she's like, okay, I believe you. So she collects the children, locks the doors, tries the phone. Since that's not working, she's going to run to the neighbor's house to use their phone to call somebody. But just as she opens the door, who is it but James Harris on the other side? This also doesn't make any sense because James Harris was literally already in the house for the book club. If he wanted to get to Miss Mary because of what just happened in the living room, he should have stuck around, waited since all of the women left. He could have just stuck around, bonded with Patty, gained Patty's trust, and then snuck off to see Miss Mary and do whatever it was he wanted to do while already having invitation to the house. It made no sense for him to leave, hang out around the house, crawl on the ceiling and try to get to Miss Mary, and then just come back around to the front door. It was just for the spooky aesthetics, and it wasn't spooky because I obviously saw the author doing, like, this with the person. If I had a doll right here, you could see it, but he was just swinging James around against the house for those movements of the plot. If you wanted to check on her, why didn't you hang out after the book club dispersed? Lies. I can't even call it lies from James. This is lies from the author. What are you doing? Do you ever stop to ask yourself why this character would act like this? Why this character would make this decision? Because it doesn't seem like you do. I'm just very frustrated by this kind of stuff, okay? I am sorry. It only gets worse from here, though. James tries to get into the house to go and see Miss Mary, but otherwise he just kind of hangs out with the family until the cops arrive, and then 45 minutes later, Carter arrives from work, and then Carter randomly gets mad at Patty for calling the cops, saying, because you called the cops, they're going to think I'm a wife beater. That didn't make any sense because, one, he wasn't at home, so why would they think that he was a wife beater? And two, they had the weird thing with Mrs. Savage. And they live in a nice community. Why would he not assume that the neighbors would assume that there was a burglar or something? Because that's a reasonable thing, especially when you're not home. It was just an opportunity to make Carter yell at Patty because it wanted to make Carter look like a bad person in a totally fake way. So then everyone goes off to bed. Patty goes downstairs to check on Miss Mary, who launches into her first and only bit of lucidity in the entire book in order to spend a chapter, the whole chapter, expositing background information of when she was a child, and none of it even matters. It's like, oh, I know James Harris. We got basically all that we needed from her saying that, and then having the picture, and then having the picture come back later in the story. Everything about how he made money in the area and became part of like the brewing of alcohol in the area that made money and then bounced doesn't come into any of the story at all later. It doesn't turn into Patty learning anything new about the area. It doesn't turn Patty into knowing where to look for information. After experiencing Lucid Mary, Patty is now obsessing and paranoid. She has nightmares, and Carter holds her when she's sleeping to help her sleep and tries to comfort her, you know, because even though she's acting nutty, he's still trying to be a good husband to her. James keeps interrupting family dinner continuously, specifically around dinner time. Specifically, he visits around dinner time. Carter's annoyed that James keeps visiting, which is also weird that this eventually turns into Carter being good friends with James. So, like, why is Carter getting pissed off that James is around? And then how did James and Carter become friends? Because it just time skips through all that and says, oh, by the way, this is how it is now. But these family dinners that are being interrupted would have been a great way for James to fake build a relationship with Carter's family and make Carter jealous and feel like he doesn't belong with his own kids and his wife. But this opportunity is totally squandered by Grady. There is another random section of this book where Patty and Carter go to a birthday party, and we get two short sections in Mrs. Green's perspective that make very little sense and do nothing but give Miss Green a photograph and then have Miss Mary get attacked by rats from Mrs. Green's perspective. So we just get to witness that. But when you don't have multi-perspectives the whole way through, it's just disruptive and very obvious. The author is going, here, I have no better way to show you this, so I'm just going to show you this in this manner. But as Miss Green is taking care of Miss Mary, they're attacked by a bunch of rats. The rats attack and basically gnaw to death Miss Mary and the family dog. The dog survives this, but the dog is so unimportant to this entire plot. You just need to know that there is a dog because Grady, I don't know, thinks that he's edgy. You'll see why in a little bit. So Miss Mary dies because of the damage, and we time skip to that funeral, then we time skip some more after that. There's a lot of time skipping because stuff really doesn't matter and there's nothing really going on. There's house cleaning, taking care of the kids, moving on, no attachment. Patty then calls the book club friends because she's feeling overwhelmed by everything and totally alone, but they all ignore her except for Kitty. Kitty and Patty then go to visit Mrs. Green in her poor neighborhood, and Mrs. Green mentions that she needs money fast to get her kids out of this neighborhood so that they aren't taken by the bad man like some of the other people in the neighborhood. This is when Miss Green informs Patty about Boo Daddy, who's been stealing children in the neighborhood and who is also the person that made Francine go missing. This is when we actually learn who Francine was, by the way, you know, way back when I mentioned it when Mr. Harris was brought in. Mrs. Green mentions part of a license plate and a white van that she'd seen in the neighborhood. Patty then goes to Grace's house since Grace catalogs license plates and discovers that that license plate matches James Harris's van. So now Patty is very sure that James Harris is doing something suspicious, and she's getting paranoid and freaked out again about James Harris when all the dust had settled about that. And Grace is like, Patty, you're off your rocker. Go and vacuum your curtains. That's not a euphemism for taking a bath, though I feel like it has to be a euphemism for something, right? It has to be. So now Patty is alone with her son. Her daughter is off doing something. Her son's in a bad mood. She just chews him out over asking her what is for dinner. And I, at this point, am very confused as to why her son does not like her in the least bit. It's not like she snaps at him every time he tries to engage with her. Oh, that is it. More son watching Nazi imagery, because I know I haven't said it yet, but the son in this is obsessed continuously with Nazi imagery, Nazi stuff, collects Nazi dolls, always every reference to anything he's doing is Nazi, and I don't know why. If you have any theories, let me know. Patty continues to resent everyone, but especially resents James now for some reason. She calls Mrs. Green to see if she can talk to the neighbor about the, missing daughter, and Miss Green takes Patty over to this woman named Wanda. When they go to meet the daughter, who is supposed to be sleeping, she's gone. Patty grabs a flashlight and runs out into the woods to look for the missing girl. I don't know why Mom didn't go looking, but Patty went looking. Here, she stumbles upon a white van where James is feasting on the missing girl inside with his vampire straw face. Patty runs back to the house, tells them what she saw, and by the time the cops arrive, the child is back in her bed and doesn't know what happened. Then, Carter also shows up to collect Patty. No one believes Patty when she says she saw James molesting the child in the woods. Everyone insists if Wanda wants anything done, she needs her child to be assessed by professionals, and Patty promises the DSS won't take the child away from Wanda, so she can just trust the government for sure. Yeah, that promise immediately is not kept because the feds definitely take Wanda's daughter when she's at the hospital. Patty's pissed off at Carter because he didn't fight to keep the child from going to the feds, and he's like, well, my hands were tied because I'm just a psychologist at the hospital and I'm trying to get a promotion, and you know how bad it looks if I'm over here trying to defend a child who was clearly abused at her house and saying, oh no, don't take her. Like, that's not my job, and I'm trying to get a promotion, Patty. And Patty is like, you're a terrible person, Carter. There's no pleasing anybody in this, and Patty just kind of continuously uses people for her thing and then gets mad when they don't do what she wants, but whatever. Dinner time, and Blue won't stop talking about Hitler. James interrupts dinner again and says that he's not a bad guy and everything Patty thinks about him is absolutely wrong. For some reason, despite her annoyance, fear, and obsession, Patty invites James into the house for dessert. Like, she's had all of these issues. She's just accused him of molesting somebody in the forest, and he comes to the door and he's like, hey, look, you got the wrong idea about me. And she's like, this motherfucker lying to my face. Why don't you come in for lunch, for dessert? And there's no reason for this to happen except Grady needs James and Carter to dunk on Patty. And so he sits down at the table and the two of them dunk on her for being insane. But there's no legitimate reason why she should have invited him in at that time. It would have actually made more sense if Patty was like, you need to leave. And then her husband was like, hey, who's at the door, Patty? And then she goes, no, she doesn't answer because she doesn't want to tell Carter who it is. And then James goes, oh, it's just me, James Harris. And then Carter could have been like, oh, why don't you come in for dessert? and then they could have dunked on Patty. But there was no reason for Patty to let him in. At this point, as she is freaking out that he molested a girl in the woods, you're going to have him come in and be close to your son? Really? Really, Patty? With the dinner over and Patty more sure than ever that James is a vampire, she goes and buys a bunch of vampire books so that she can learn how to fight them. Don't worry, we don't get any information whatsoever from the list of vampire books. We just get a list of vampire books and we are told that she reads them. Also, don't worry, those books never do anything for this plot. Like, she doesn't learn anything from them. She shares no knowledge of what she got from them. They're just mentioned, and then we move on. Skip to the book club. Patty tells her friends that James is selling drugs to children because she knows that that is easier for them to take than saying that he is a vampire. Still, nobody believes her. The next day, Grace calls to apologize. Then the two of them agree to visit James's storage unit to look for clues and sussery. Because Patty hates her family, she's annoyed that Corey's at home instead of being at her friend's house. Her entire family always just gets in the way of everything that she wants. She cannot believe she chose to become a housewife because families suck. The book club ladies all come over because they're all on Patty's side now about James Harris being questionable. And they're all going to go over and check out the car. However, I'm not really sure why they're all on her side. We just sort of glossed over that, and now they've all joined Team Nutto. Also, once the ladies have assembled, Carter shows back up at the house along with all of the husbands because this is an intervention. Y'all are crazy, and you need to apologize to James Harris for saying he is a child molesting drug dealer. Patty spits in his face when she's expected to apologize, and then all of the women, as good subjects to the men in this bizarro book, they kiss James's ring in apology. I don't know what we're doing here. I don't know what we're doing here. Legitimately. Look, even he's confused. All the women are then dressed down and salted for being too smart to be housewives. And yes, they're probably bored and unstimulated because housewifery is so boring and such a waste of talent. But that doesn't mean that you can make stuff up about your neighbors. After this happens, Patty still tries to get the women to pursue James with her, but no one will. Carter thinks Patty is crazy and obsessed. She is. So he gives her some pills and suggests that she work on her anxiety about this. Patty goes to Grace and screams at her for not confronting what Patty wants her to, and how Patty is the only one that can see what is truly going on. It is so contrived how bad this is. Everyone is now mad at Patty. Patty is mad that no one is listening to her, and so she downs the entire bottle of pills that Carter gave her because she's a prat that apparently suicide is her option when she's not getting her way. She wakes up in a hospital to find out that her 8-year-old son found her convulsing on the kitchen floor. Nice parenting, Patty. At least go kill yourself by the garbage where you belong. Her kids obviously hate her now because she chose being dead over being their mother. That's on you, Patty. She also ignores the fact that she's ignored her children the entire story, but you know, it's kind of a statement to say I'd rather die than parent you. Regardless of how all of this is within Patty's choice of her own actions, she blames her husband for everything she's done because she has no sense of responsibility over herself. As she flips out at Carter yet again, Carter tries to calm her down and say, I need a wife and a partner. I don't need a crazy, obsessed person. So you can either choose to work with me, be my wife, and we can recover through this, or you can go and crazily obsess over and chase over James. It's your pick. And that's where that scene ends, and we skip 3 years into the future. This is so egregious to me. Like, bro, this is the most emotionally high, intense thing that you can do in a story. And you're giving your character this ultimatum of who they are, how they relate to their kids, how they relate to the neighborhood, and you blue ball it and skip into the future so you don't have to deal with the fallout of the drama you created. Are you kidding? I got so mad at this. It is so lazy. And how has nobody commented on this trash yet? Do not have this person commit suicide, attempt suicide, and then skip through all of the fallout from that suicide. Like, okay, moving on. Yeah, so we're skipped 3 years into the future. Patty is now continuing to be a self-loathing housewife whose only existence is behaving herself for the benefit of her husband. Since none of the husbands trust their wives anymore, since they all lied to them, they've all joined the book club, and now the women are having to read books that the men choose, and they're even more miserable because obviously they hate men, so they don't want to read the books their husbands chose. I'm thinking that Grady has got a personal issue with marriage at this point, but that is just my supposition. based on what I'm stuck reading. At the book club, we basically find out the time skip was a lazy plot device, so Grady didn't have to deal with the difficult emotional fallout of his choices that he made for his story. How? Because 3 years have passed since Patty's attempted suicide, yet the ladies of the book club are still talking about it like it happened yesterday, as if nothing else at all could have possibly happened in the last 3 years that maybe is more dramatic than that, that maybe might have their attention, that maybe they've moved on from. Nah, it is still fresh gossip that she committed suicide or attempted suicide 3 years ago. Really? I'm wondering if that time skip was really just inserted like post-mortem of this book to make up for the lack of development, but it wasn't initially there because there are other things that don't make any sense after this time skip. Oh yeah, this is also where we learn that over the last 3 years, James has become best friends with all of the husbands and has made a name for himself in town, and everybody apparently likes him now, which we also didn't have to develop because this... What is character development? What is plot development? I don't freaking know. So at the book club, Patty is feeling bad for herself and how miserable she is, reminding us how she hates everything again, and I hate her so much, and how she treats her family. Now, Carter and Patty are fighting about their son's extracurriculars and his interest in the Nazis, in his disfiguration of figurines, and in his spray painting the school dog. So they're like, we need to go and talk to him because he's acting kind of out of control, and he's like 11. This is going to get really bad if we don't step in. So they go up to talk to him. Turns out during the 3-year time skip, Patty also did not try to relate to or recover her relationship with her children, just completely ignored them and neglected them, which you'd think that would be a priority after trying to off yourself. You'd think that would be, if you're adjusting to things, and you're a housewife, maybe connecting with your children is something you want to do, especially if you felt bad about trying to kill yourself. Patty and Carter can't really talk to Blue, the son, because they both don't know him very well. So Corey hears the two of them arguing, the two parents arguing in the hallway, and comes out to offer them tips on how to talk to Blue because unlike them, she actually spends time around him and they have a relationship. Patty snaps at her to go back to her room, though, and to stay out of this, confirming that neither Carter nor Patty have a relationship with either of their children. This is especially concerning after Patty's suicide. Blue goes downstairs, saying that he's going to run away because he hates them so much. Carter threatens to call the cops if he does, so Blue goes back upstairs. The next time he comes down, he's got all of the phone cords in his hand, and he shows them off, and then is like, what are you gonna do now? And then he leaves. I don't really know why he didn't just take the phone cords and then walk out the door, and then that could have alerted them that damn it, Blue just left. And then they try to call the cops and they pick up and the dial tone is not there. That would have been a better way to do this than having to show the audience what you've done, because it doesn't make any sense other than you think the audience is an idiot. The two take their time relocating Blue, which is, they're like, well, we'll go to the store and get phone cords after dinner, maybe. So it's about 10 o'clock before they try calling somebody. But it's actually James that calls to say, hey, Blue is over at my house, by the way. And he's kind of worked up, so I would just let him spend the night. And then Blue gets on the phone immediately and says that he loves his mother. Now, I thought that this was going to have some sort of weird implication of, like, maybe he was being tortured, maybe he was being threatened, maybe he was being charmed, maybe Carter was, or maybe James was going to use this as a moment to show like how he was a good father to Blue, to like ingratiate himself to Patty. None of that happens. This again turns into one of those forgotten details that never really builds into anything and never accumulates into anything. It's just bizarre. As Patty is on the phone with Blue and listening to his apology and him saying, I love you, and he's at James's house, Patty is all of a sudden like, I don't even remember why I was suspicious of James before. I just remembered that I was adamantly suspicious, and now I just don't. Nothing in this novel makes any sense. It's all a plot contrivance. The next morning, Carter picks up Blue from James's house while Patty cleans the house alone, because that's all Grady thinks housewives do, apparently. I don't know. That's all that they do in this book, so maybe it's not all Grady thinks, but it's all that is apparent in this book. Patty calls James to thank him for taking care of her. Patty calls James to thank him for taking care of her son. He invites her over for coffee, but she says no, she's got things to do. More cleaning ensues. This turns into a reference to Miss Mary piss as she cleans, because even 3 years after Miss Mary has died, the house apparently still smells like piss. Then all of a sudden, Patty thinks she's hearing things. And it is the voice of Miss Mary in her head telling her where to go next in the plot. This is legitimately a ghost that she sees in front of her, telling her where to go. No, Ghosts are never used again before or after this, so I'm inclined to think that this character in this novel that looks like Miss Mary is actually Grady Hendrix in a white curly wig and a muumuu, pretending to be an old woman. Because it sounds an awful lot like the author inserting himself in the novel to tell the characters where to go because they're too dumb. Or because they're not given the resources to find where to go next. So Miss Mary just shows up long enough to tell Patty exactly where to go next, which is to go and talk to the old caretaker, Miss Green. With the directive from the author, Patty obviously follows what she was told. Mrs. Green doesn't like Patty because of everything that happened 3 years ago with the death of Miss Mary and then the neighbor's daughter being taken by the feds. But she still talks to Patty and shows her this picture that Miss Mary gave her 3 years ago. Doesn't know where it came from, but she's pretty sure that it came from Miss Mary. And it's got a guy in it. It's from like the 1930s. And it's got a guy in it that looks just like James Harris. And he has not aged since that picture was taken. So now Patty is arguing with Mrs. Green about the legitimacy of this being actually James Harris, and that, no, I don't want to be sus. I can't be sus, because for some reason, we're not sus now, even though we've spent the entire book, we're 70% now, the entire book we've been sus and fighting to get other people sus, but now it's too far, and Patty is going to be like, no, I can't be sus. I don't think James did anything. Okay, James did something. Okay. And there's also a very brief statement between Miss Green and Patty that said they saw Miss Mary's ghost because Miss Mary is in hell, and you can only appear as a ghost if you're in hell. Why? Why do you hate Miss Mary so much? Grady Hendrix. Who hurt you? Now that Patty is back all in for James, she wants allies for the coming plan to sneak into James's house to look for sussery, you know, like hints, specifically trophies, because she's pretty sure that there will be trophies in the house of the people that he's killed. So who does she talk to but the very Christian Slick, who she emotionally manipulates and blackmails into being part of her scheme. So Slick agrees to go. Patty also expresses to Slick, like, all of her sussery, shows her the picture, all of that noise. So they agree to meet up at the house. Mrs. Green is James's house cleaner. And so after James leaves the next day, then Mrs. Green is going to let them in so that they can go and search the place. And there's also a secondary cleaner that Patty just pays off. So the next morning when Patty gets to the house, Slick isn't there, but she still goes in and searches the place on her own. She doesn't find anything and is about to give up after hours when Mrs. Green is like, did you try the attic? Because here's the attic cord. It looks like you haven't tried the attic. And Patty, because she's an idiot, is like, I didn't even notice that was there. So she goes upstairs into the attic and she finds a body in the attic. This is the body of Francine, who died 3 years ago. Are you telling me a 500-year-old vampire did not get rid of the body of somebody, of an old meal? Where are the other, if he is a pack rat for the bodies and the people that he eats, where are the other bodies? Why is it specifically Francine still in that attic? We're never given a reason for this. Again, this is another one of those things that it's like, what did the 3-year time skip do? It just made all of this other stuff bizarre. Because that would make sense if she was freshly killed, like in the last week, and he just hadn't gotten rid of the body yet. But 3 years in the future, come on. There's either going to be an attic full of bodies, or it's not going to be Francine up there. So then just as Patty is running down the stairs to go and get Miss Green to come and see the body and then help her move the body, because that's the evidence, James gets home. So then Patty runs back upstairs and hides in the attic. James knows that Patty is there and dismisses the cleaning ladies, then walks around the house yelling for Patty, telling her to come out. He knows she's there. And he goes up into the attic, but she's buried herself in like old garbage and mothballs and all sorts of things, so that her smell is covered and her body is covered, and it's in this dark area. So James doesn't find her. He goes back downstairs to like look around the house again, and then he receives a call that one of his properties is on fire. So he leaves the house. Again, would he not be, one, suspicious of that call? Two, he's got friends, so he can call his friends that he trusts to be like, hey, is my property on fire? And he could have still used that as an opportunity to go outside, sit, and wait for Patty so that he could ambush her when she comes out. Because no way that this character, if we're pretending this is a legitimate person, no way that he would not be devious enough to be thinking, she's trying to trick me, someone is trying to trick me. There's somebody in this house. They know what I've done. It's the same person that's been obsessed with me for 3 years. No way. But This is what we got. We got Grady Hendrix holding these little people like dolls and just going. James Harris is gone, which means Patty now runs in because the reason the person that called him was either adjacent to Kitty or was Kitty. And that was specifically as a distraction so that Kitty could go and collect Patty. So she goes up to after, and Mrs. Green was the one that told Kitty about this all happening. So then Kitty goes upstairs and frees Patty from the attic. And then Patty is like, well, I can't leave yet. There, you have to see this. James Harris is the murderer. Look, there's a body. So she takes Kitty upstairs, shows her the body. Kitty now believes. And then they go back downstairs because they're taking the body down. But they realize, oh wait, no, because they have to leave, so they're not taking the body down. So they go back downstairs, and they're like, well, we'll come back for the body later. We have to get out before James Harris comes back. However, there's dirt everywhere from having gone in the attic, and everything in James Harris's house being white. So Patty is like, well, we can't just leave because the footprints are everywhere. We're going to have to shampoo the entire house in order to hide our footprints so James Harris doesn't know that we were here. So they don't have time to move the body, but they have time to shampoo the entire house. Then they run out just as James gets in, and Patty has grabbed an ID card for Francine, and then they're out the door. The plan then with the ID card is to plant the ID card on James, then alert the cops, have the cops find the ID card on James, then they'll get suspicious, then they'll go check his house, and then they'll find the body. That's the plan. She's also planning to drop this card in James Harris's vicinity during a Halloween party, because it's around at the time of Halloween. As Patty is getting ready to go to this Halloween party to go and drop this card, she gets a random phone call from somebody that is muttering, don't make a sound or something like that. This, it turns out to be Slick, and Slick is pretty much non-communicative, period. She just keeps muttering this, and Patty finds out that Slick is back at her house. So Patty drives across town instantly to go and see Slick in her house. She runs upstairs. Turns out Slick's family is downstairs playing Monopoly, and Slick had also been downstairs playing Monopoly some time ago, but she went upstairs to use the bathroom, still hadn't come out. Family is somehow not suspicious or concerned that, Slick hasn't been back down in however long it's been. But Patty runs upstairs and tells them, hey, yeah, But Patty runs upstairs and tells the family, yeah, Slick called me and wanted me to come for a visit, and I just wanted to come check on her, blah, blah, blah. So she goes upstairs. Slick is in the bathtub and had just been raped by James Harris. Was oozing black demon seed out of her areas. And as Leland's husband comes upstairs to check on his wife and check on Patty, because this all looks sus, Patty lied to him about what was going on with his wife because his wife didn't want anybody to know what was going on with her. And then Patty helps Slick clean up and then puts her to bed. And then, again, lies to Slick's husband. Because Slick is like, he said if anybody finds out, he would kill my family. It also turns out, as she goes to the hospital the next day, that Slick was given AIDS by James Harris. Apparently, Demon Seed carries the AIDS. And while at the hospital, James Harris, along with all of the women from the book club, come to visit Slick. Now, again, because Patty doesn't have a spine and has the inability to do anything helpful, useful ever, she can't tell James Harris to get the frick out of the room. Instead, she makes the excuse that they all need to leave because Slick needs to rest. And as she's sitting there being suspicious of James, knowing James brutalized her friend like this. Oh yeah, this is why. I forgot to mention. This is why James raped her. Because the morning the day that Patty and Slick were supposed to go and break into that house, Slick had called James to say, hey, we've got pictures of you from the 1930s. We know what you are. Please just leave the town quietly so we don't have to expose you. Patty is in your house right now looking for evidence. So one, there's no reason that you would out somebody who's breaking into a house to get evidence. So anyway, this was just a way to punish Slick because why not? So while Patty is aware of all of this, she doesn't have a car because I think Corey has the car. And so she's looking at her friend from the book club and then James Harris. Those are her options to get home. And even while she's sitting here looking at Slick, knowing what he did to Slick, knowing that he knows that she was in his house, she's like, hey, James Harris, will you take me home? And he's like, sure. And so they're driving over this bridge, and she's like, if he turns left, he's going to kill me and throw me in a ditch. If he turns right, then he's taking me home. She's got no backup plan in case he attacks her. Nothing. She's lucky that he didn't attack her, because he could have right then. And there's absolutely no reason why he shouldn't attack her then. Because the stuff that he does in the next areas is all about attacking it. There's no motive for this character. Okay, moving on. Like, we'll get into all of this with the critiques of this actual book. But, like, what the frick? So she drops the card in his car. That's how she's planting the card on him. James Harris finds it, so it doesn't even matter. The whole thing was entirely useless. But once they get to her house and he drops her off, he stops and goes, Patty, I care about you. I care about you dearly. So I need to tell you this. Your friend Slick got the AIDS because her husband is cheating on her. When me and the boys go out of town, I introduce them to some bunny ranches, and they use the bunny ranches. And so Leland, her husband, came back with the AIDS. Now, I'm not cheating. I'm not using the bunny ranches, but I thought that you should know your husband, Carter, also using the bunny ranches. I wanted you to know so that you don't catch the AIDS from your husband too. Now, why Patty believes this, I don't know. This guy was a rapist. This guy has obviously been trying to break up her family. This guy has obviously been lying. She obviously is suspicious of this guy, of everything that he's done to the kids in the neighborhoods. And she just believes what he's saying about her husband. I don't know. So he's like, I want to be your new husband. Please let me replace Carter after you've now gotten this information. She's like, let me think about it. And she goes inside. After Patty goes inside, she hears a sound that is akin to the sound of a window opening in her daughter's room. And she's like, uh-oh, my daughter is sneaking out of the house. This turns into Patty going to check her daughter's room, where she finds James Harris and her daughter naked in the bed. And James Harris is sucking on the daughter's thigh for blood while the daughter is in vampiric ecstasy. I don't know why James Harris would do this when he was just trying to ingratiate himself to Patty. Again, makes no sense. But Patty beats him off in a non-sexual way with a shoe and chases him out, and James Harris the entire time is saying, this is all your fault. After James is gone, Patty reflects on everything that has happened, that this happened to her daughter, and then takes some pictures of her daughter's body before cleaning her up, because that is now evidence. So the next day, she recruits Mrs. Green and the girls with a plan that she is going to sleep with James Harris to get close enough for them to kill him, because that's the only way to get close enough to stab him, and the women will help in getting rid of the body and also possibly the murder. Grace protests and leaves the room. Everybody else is on board with this. And there is also, again, more manipulation, more insults, and more, you're a bad Christian if you don't help me murder and dismember this bad guy. Whatever. Patty's whole realization in this situation is, I need to sleep with somebody else. I need to be unfaithful to fix my marriage. So the night has come that Patty is going to sleep with James Harris. She had made plans to go to a Clemson game with Carter, but breaks those plans last minute, saying she feels bad because her daughter is in rehab from having withdrawal symptoms, because that's what the vampiric injection thing does. And so she misses her daughter. So she's not going to go to the Clemson game. And Carter, being the supportive man that he is like, okay, honey, you let me know if you need anything. I love you. And she's like, I don't believe him. He's saying that to me, but I was told he's been cheating on me. I don't believe him. But she says, I love you back. Then she heads upstairs to get ready to go and cheat on Carter. Nice, isn't it? So she puts on the tightest thing that she possibly can and then goes over to James Harris's house, where she meets him in the living room area and throws herself at him, and he laughs at how pathetic she is. And then she goes into a diatribe herself about how she gave up her entire life to be a wife and mother, and how all of her nurse skills just went out the window, and how it's not rewarding to be a wife and mother, and she's got nothing left, and please take pity on her. And James Harris still laughs about how pathetic she is, and then is like, okay, here is the deal. I will kill your husband. I will move into your life as the caring friend who came in for you to have a shoulder to cry on about your dead husband. And I will fuck you for a year. Then I will kill you. Then I will move on to your daughter. Then I will move on to your son. This is what it will take for me to fuck you tonight. And Patty is like, okay. So then she goes upstairs. They have sex. Time goes past them. The other women are like, where the frick is Patty? It's been 3 hours. So then they go and charge into the house. None of the doors are locked. So they walk in on Patty being sucked off by this guy. And they stab him, and he doesn't die. But now Patty goes into a fever because of the whole thing from being sucked on. They take care of Patty for a couple of hours while James Harris just lays in the bathroom bleeding and like taunting them, but not moving, even though he could and should and can obviously heal. We're told he can heal, but he never gets up. And then he just kind of waits around for them to dismember him. And there are a bunch of pages of dismemberment that make absolutely no sense as to why we're even here. And Grace shows up just in time to offer them a couple of grave sites to put James Harris's dismembered body parts in, because he will reassemble if his body parts are together. Slick dies of the AIDS and has to be cremated because it turns out that the demon seed that was put in her by James Harris would turn her into a vampire once she died. Also, Patty has that same demon seed in her, so when she dies, she will also be turned into a vampire if she is not incinerated. Then Patty is basically like in a coma for a couple of days because she wakes up in the hospital after everything, and she's like, Carter? Oh, yeah. She wakes up in the hospital. Carter's hanging over her. Carter's like, do you know what happened to James? I haven't heard from James in days. And, like, all of this crazy shit's been going on. And Patty is just like, Carter, I want a divorce. Because, of course, you do. Freaking bitch. So then she steals the kids. Somehow, I have no idea how she got the kids. She tried to commit suicide. Carter's poor, not paying child support. The dog dies. The dog comes back just in time, just in this last chapter, so Grady can kill it. It's been in nothing but the rat attack, and maybe mentioned passively before the rat attack. And I will argue that Grady only put the dog in there so that he could kill it in the end, because that's edgy, bro. But that's pretty much how this book ends. I'm pretty much 100% sure that this book is Patty having a delusional meltdown and mental break, then covering up how she and her friends murdered, at best, an innocent man, at worst, a guy preying on young women. Then the book also makes sure to congratulate its female characters on being selfish, telling you how amazing and wonderful they are throughout everything. It's so freaking arrogant, and the worst way that this book could have ended. Oh, so wonderful. These women powered through. The arrogance that bleeds through this book. So first, time to actually get into the criticisms outside of the synopsis, as if there were not enough of those already. But, let's see what happens here. So the first, Grady is actually good at titles and covers that sell books. Considering how the industry works, though he may not have had any influence on either of those things, I don't know. But it should be noted that even at 50% of the way through this book, there were still no vampires. None. Unless you count Mrs. Savage, who didn't count because she didn't look like anything, and she was never even called a vampire. She could have just had a dementia slip like Miss Mary and was in the garbage can with a raccoon. We don't know. So either the publishers lied to us about what this book is about, or the author lied. I don't know who came up with the title, but it is a lie. Grady was good at body horror when he allowed himself to do body horror. That's where he really showed the most skill for me in any of the stuff. He doesn't do characters, he doesn't do plot, he doesn't do building relationships, he doesn't do trauma or drama or building out resolutions or anything. He does body horror. Unfortunately, he only used that a couple of times. This was more confusing to me because he was not good at setting tension either. He didn't spend time setting scenes, but spent 5 pages talking about cockroaches in Patty's ear. If he'd used that level of disgust in other situations and that level of description in other situations, he could have had so much more tension. But that's basically the end of my list of good things. So, today, in edgy as the beginning, I'm not gonna lie, I think writing advice has ruined me for first lines in books. You know when they say, make it memorable and stand out? Well, now I often see lines that are trying too hard rather than being true to the story and the characters, and Grady's book felt like it was trying too hard. The first line of this book is, this story ends in blood. And then, since I already have My Best Friend's Exorcism, I looked at the front of that book, and it said, the exorcist is dead. So both of these lines stood on their own on the first page. And I'm sorry, 2 times of death and blood equals edgy, or just, it's a pattern at this point. People think that violence, blood, death, and sex are edgy, but everyone is doing them, so they're boring, cliche, and not edgy. But maybe that's not what Grady was going for. Maybe Grady was going for cringe, especially following the monologue introductory about how he was making middle-aged women badass by giving them death and blood and making them way cooler than anyone ever thinks of with women like this. It felt to me like he was starting the book off with a self-congratulations for being super clever. Give me the book before you congratulate yourself, bro. So satire. On this being a satire, is this satire? This book starts out by stating the definition of housewife as a useless woman. With this being satire, we're either going to have an exaggeration of the statement of these women being useless, or the presentation of that based on the assumption that society makes, and then something to express the opposite, irony. As we go through this book, There's the exaggerated expression that housewives do nothing but clean and complain about their children, which gives me the idea that this is the perspective that the author actually has towards housewives. So the ironic satire is them coming together to stop a vampire, proving that housewives don't just do the cleaning thing. Maybe my reading on this is incorrect, and that's not the presentation that Grady was going for in this story, but it didn't read strong to me. It read like a perversion of housewifery by someone who not only didn't understand housewives, but actually has an issue with his own mother. Maybe this is what Grady was going for. Histrionic women that couldn't see the truth worked everyone up into a frenzy and murdered an innocent man under the delusion that he was a vampire preying on their children. There's enough in this book to cast doubts on the legitimacy of the perspective. There's enough to express why Patty shouldn't be trusted, including the line from the very beginning of Patty being bored and wanting something to shake her life up. I don't know anything about Grady personally, but maybe there's a bit of hurt in there from his parents divorcing, maybe from his mother being selfish and breaking up the family, especially with how Patty prefers death over her children, and then cheats on her husband, and then finally calls for a divorce when she's the one that cheated and destroyed the family. It feels like unresolved issues to me, and I say this as someone who has had parents who divorced, who saw the carnage from it, and still recognizes and suffers from the carnage that came in my childhood. But for me, there is no social commentary in here for this to be juvenilian for how insulting it is. And it's too caustic to be Menippean or Horatian satire. I don't see satire in this so much as an insult comic who's made a target out of something or someone that he hates. His mother and her friends. Getting out of the personal business, let's talk about the shallow characters. Every character in this novel is shallowly written, if barely thought of at all. None of them have any motive for what they're doing that takes them from scene to scene or action to action, and some of them even felt as though they were just a punchline. Patty, as the main character, should have had some development or some reason for existing or acting the way that she did, yet every choice that she made had little motivation beyond Grady's hand pushing on her back to lead her to the next thing that she was supposed to be doing. Every character in the book was a carbon copy of the others, with little distinction beyond Slick being the most outspoken Christian and Marilyn being the biggest sexist, to the point that she even complained that books dared have a male protagonist. But going to Patty's character, what did she even do with her day? She had no hobbies, didn't clean the house, didn't take care of Miss Mary, didn't interact with her kids, didn't have friends. Like, what did she even do? She's so undeveloped. She literally just lived in a void until the author picked her up and told her to go somewhere. She was beyond shallow. None of the women actually liked each other, which was really disappointing when the book kind of sold itself as a sisterhood or a group of friends that needed to come together to protect the neighborhood. The way they interacted, they clearly didn't like each other, and I don't know if that's because Grady can't write friendships or if he just doesn't think that women can actually be friends and are actually catty all the time. The men are more or less non-characters, and the way Patty responds to any of them just makes her actually look insane and delusional. Almost every time Carter is mentioned, he's being loving, affectionate, and caring to his wife, with few exceptions that don't even make sense for him, like when he's yelling about her calling the cops and people thinking he's a wife beater. These instances just felt like Grady's fingers going over the story again to tell people how to feel and how to think about characters that are acting out of character. After Patty, we've got James as the worst character in this novel. He may even be the absolute worst because the other one is the protagonist, so you have to spend all the time with her. James at least comes in and out. But James is terrible. He's a 400-year-old antagonist with no plan, no motive, no drive, no reason to be in the hot pursuit of Patty. She does not even, he could at least have been I'm going to pursue Patty because she's obviously made herself an easy target by taking an intrigue in me. But she didn't even have that. So, go pick somebody that he can charm and then find, oh, she wants me. I can use that to my advantage. There was no reason for him to go after Patty, even though there was ample opportunity, especially for how consistently Carter was absent. He could have slid right in there and actually followed through on his thing of saying, hey, your husband is never here. I'm going to be the friend that slides in and builds this relationship with you. It could have had that sussery of that guy next door sneaking into your house and befriending your wife and then sleeping with your wife and cucking you or whatever. You could have taken so many different ways to get into the house. And there are none, which took away James's autonomy, his motive, his reason for being anything, but just, here's a creepy guy doing creepy things. A person without motive is not creepy, Grady. It's cheap. You get as much out of this, you get more out of a jump scare. But as far as I can tell, none of his actions have reason behind them. Why does he pick off Destiny? Why does he try and charm Patty? Why does he go into the book club? Why does he suck off Corey right after trying to charm Patty into trusting him when it's a risk to his game that he's playing? Why did he turn Miss Savage? Did he turn Mrs. Savage? Did he even purposefully turn her? Did he sleep with Mrs. Savage? Because the intention later in the story is that if he bangs you and comes in you, you're going to become a vampire. Why did he do that to Mrs. Savage? Why did he let Mrs. Savage run away? Did Mrs. Savage not just make it super suspicious that maybe somebody will be led to him because he came into Mrs. Savage's house as the nephew and then she went crazy and like, what is going on? Why did he pick this neighborhood? It also would have made more sense if Patty would have caught on to something suspicious happening with James, especially if James was eyeing her son and her investigation led her to see some really weird things. Like if he was looking at Blue as a possible protege to turn. And then Patty was like, oh, this guy is getting creepy by coming into my house. And then she goes and investigates James. And then discovers all of this other stuff that and unlocks, oh, he's a freaking vampire. Like, there were so many different ways that you could have come at this, with Patty actually being an active character, and none of it was taken. There's no character build, no tension, and no payoff because none of the choices mattered. Grady continuously proved that he would throw something at you at random in order to fix a problem rather than build into it. That's not a twist, that's lazy and bad writing. Next point, Patty is unbelievably insufferable. She downs a bunch of pills to kill herself and blames others. She contributes nothing to the family, but accuses Carter of not trying when he tries easily more than she does, including picking up the kids despite having a full-time job. Her part in the climax is literally a climax. Then her friends do everything for her while she writhes in ecstasy and a fever. Our introduction to her is that she's a whiny, tortured soul in an upper-middle-class neighborhood, and she stays that way after draining her husband of all of his money and destroying everyone's lives so that she could sleep with another man. She never acknowledges what she's done wrong, she's never proactive, she never gets better, and she's rewarded in the end, and everyone claps, including the author. It's unbelievable. Final note on this woman, I hate this stupid cow. Lazy writing. This reads like a first draft, plotted out via outline, and everything just forced to go in a direction. Questions are left unanswered, obscure choices are made without a reason or resolution, the book club is useless, and it doesn't contribute anything. And don't get me started on Grady literally inserting himself in the plot wearing Miss Mary as a skin suit so that he can talk to Patty. Additionally, near the end of the book, it's planted that girls were calling the house to prove that Carter was cheating on him. Throughout the entire 90% of this book, when Patty is at home and being a housewife, not one phone call comes into the house that she picks up and somebody is asking for her husband. Not once. If you want me to believe that the husband is cheating and that there were all of these phone calls from all of these girls, you don't spring it on me at 90% and say, oh, that happened. You're trying to gaslight me with your own narration. You suck. You can't make me buy it, Grady. This kind of trash, thrust into monologues at the end, acts like it can rewrite the story, and the author can't be bothered to go back and revise. You're gaslighting the reader with your narration. Bite me with your bad writing and your refusal to deliver, Grady. Gloves off. I'm actually mad about this. Time skips. To go along with lazy writing, this book relies heavily on time skipping, then telling you what happened in order to build relationships rather than playing scenes out and seeing things exist. Grady can only tell you what's happened because he honestly reads incompetent to being able to write actual human interactions and show relationships. Can he do those things for real? Based on this book, I couldn't tell you. I didn't see it. I might sound very harsh right here, but that's because Grady deserves it specifically for introducing Patty's suicide, her ultimatum for how she destroyed her family, and then time skipping over everything that would have been the recovery period. Are you serious? Most egregious thing I've read in a book in the last 3 months. From the way that this was written, we know that Patty ignored the consequences to her actions and checked out on her children and her husband because even after trying to kill herself, she still resented them. It's just disrespectful to the reader, disrespectful to the characters, and straight lazy. What are you even doing writing if you don't want to write the intense, consequential situations you've introduced into your own book? This is literally what they're about. If that's how you're going to be with situations like the suicide, then don't even put it in the book. Because even then, he acts like the time skip didn't even happen, allowing conversations and decaying bodies to remain in the same place they were 3 years prior like nothing happened. So what is the point of even doing this? It made no difference on the plot. You take out that suicide, literally no difference. You take out that suicide in the 3-year time skip, literally no difference on the plot. You got maybe an extra 10 pages. Maybe. That's being generous. The uselessness of the book club. This has to be brought up because it's on the freaking cover of the book. This book was one missed opportunity after another. Like, the book club could have drawn parallels between the actual books that the group was reading and Patty's growing suspicion of James over time. Just him mimicking the behaviors of Ted Bundy to get closer to her when he's trying to snipe her child. This could have been built on, you're reading too many edgy books, dear. You're getting kind of paranoid. That could have been built into the narrative that was already there for that, but instead we didn't see it. The book club also could have primarily read vampire books, and Grady could have drawn constant parallels between the books and James, and even Patty noticing things about James that match the things in the book and don't match other vampire things in the book, letting us have more of those details of all of those vampire books and actually giving the reader information about vampires as they pertain to this world. Grady could have had the kids help with the resolution because at some point her daughter was reading Salem's Lot, and then she went out and bought her own copy of Salem's Lot. Imagine if they had come together as a family and a neighborhood to defeat this guy. Imagine Blue's obsession with Nazi Germany actually also leading to him discussing the Nazis' interest in the supernatural and the paranormal, and so then he shares information about that, which can then be applied to James. Because James was what? Still alive in the 1930s? So then they could have been like, oh, he was through World War II as well. The book club could have been used to create genuine relationships. The setting could have been used to create a genuine terror and tension. The plot stated on the cover of this book could have actually been inside of it with more than one freaking vampire in the neighborhood. Make it a coven, slowly coming in, strangling the families that still exist and taking over. But no, every opportunity was shot by bad writing, every interesting choice ignored, and for what purpose? I don't really know. I just felt like Grady gave me the middle finger both at the beginning and closing of the book. There are so many chances to allow discovery, build tension, find a new path with the book club and perception, but it all was overlooked, and the only answers Patty gets are given to her by Grady personally. No setting, no tension, no answers. Despite being 400 pages long, Grady doesn't bother with creating setting or lore. What are vampires like in this world? We don't know. He never sets up anything. What do they eat? How do they feed? Well, James gives them this tongue straw, but Mrs. Savage didn't have one. Why didn't Mrs. Savage have that feeding situation? Why did James feed in a sexual manner, but Mrs. Savage was feeding in a non-sexual manner? Is feeding not instinctual? Did Mrs. Savage actually die, or is she running around somewhere because they didn't burn her body? Mrs. Savage wasn't mentioned until the page before she was actually brought up in the trash cans, which was a waste of opportunity because her disappearance, her dirty yard, the trash on the sidewalk that she usually cleaned up, all could have been a great way to build tension in the neighborhood that something was wrong and the fear within these suburban women that something wasn't right. Think about Patty never needed to lock the door at night. Twisting the deadbolt felt wrong, but until she got to the bottom of what happened to Mrs. Savage and her disappearance, she couldn't justify leaving the door unlocked. There was so much opportunity. Francine gets mentioned in the earlier chapter with no description of her, her van, who she is, her relationship to anything, and for a while, I just thought that she was another relative of the dead Savage. Apparently not. And how are you going to accuse Blue? Oh, I totally overlooked this in the plot, but how are you going to accuse Blue of covering up James Harris raping Slick, but never resolve it? So, Blue was over at James's house on Halloween night. He left Halloween night to go and hang out with James because he didn't want to be at home. He obviously hates his mother. So he went over there. Obviously, also, James Harris slipped out of his house that night to go and rape Slick. So then the next time that Patty saw Blue, she was like, did James ever leave the room for a long period of time, trying to figure out when James left to rape Slick? And Blue was like, no. And the whole insinuation, she keeps dogging him about this. And the whole insinuation of the scene is that Blue is covering for James Harris's escape to go and rape Slick, and that never comes back. There are never any consequences. There's never any discussion. There's no weight to it at all. It just is a random conversation that happens for maybe a page to 2 pages and then is gone. Why would you do this? And then suddenly she's like, oh yeah, I definitely want to have the custody of my children after I think my child lied about a rapist. Are you kidding? About a rapist that also went after her daughter? Are you kidding? But Grady is never going to go over the implications of what this is to Blue or what she's saying about Blue as a person, or or recognize if he just didn't notice because he was so focused on playing video games that time went over his head. Grady's never going to go over what Patty's going to do with her problematic son who's covering up for a rapist that she's suspicious of. It's just brought up and dropped, and then she loves her son in the end. And briefly, here's a better way to have started the beginning that would have kept the integrity of this and actually built the tension. 1. Introduce us to the neighborhood by Patty existing in it, and she's concerned that Mrs. Savage isn't picking up the litter. Immediately, we're introduced to Mrs. Savage, and immediately we get the juxtaposition of expectations versus reality that something is off. Number 2, Mrs. Savage's prize-winning yard isn't being cared for, and that's bizarre since Mrs. Savage is kind of anal retentive about her yard. Number 3, because of this fear of what's happened to Mrs. Savage, Patty forgot to read the book of the month. Number 4, at the book club that is run by Marjorie, Patty tells the club about Mrs. Savage and her fears, and she gets ostracized by everyone because they all hate Mrs. Savage and they're catty as frick. Number 5, this gives Patty a chance to look caring for like at least 2 seconds, because she never looks caring the whole rest of the book. Number 6, the neighborhood doesn't feel safe as it normally would because of Mrs. Savage's disappearance, and now there are a number of rumors about a nephew moving in. Number 7, Patty then works herself into a panicked frenzy because of the rumors and gossip that come up in the second book club, because everyone over there is insane over this and reads true crime and are trying to solve what happened to Mrs. Savage, especially because Mary Ellen, her husband is a cop, and so she's going to be over there being like, I bet this man moved in and he freaking killed her, because you know how many times in true crime the man just goes in and kills the bitch? Like, bring it. Number 8, when Patty gets home later and takes out the trash, she's created a panic in her head about serial killers or kidnappers taking older women because of Mrs. Savage, and now she is possible to be victim. Number 9, she hears a noise outside and thinks, okay, maybe my son was right and onto something about hating the dark, but she just trashed him, so she has to take the garbage out or she's going to look like a hypocrite. And she's not scared of the dark. She assures you she is not scared of the dark. And then 10, this is when she runs into Mrs. Savage. We've now had previous 50 pages or however long all of that takes to set up expectations, to meet who this is, and then to get the reality of what happened to her and get that introduction. And now we've got the reveal. I don't know. Maybe it's just me and I'm tooting my own horn at what this looks like, but I think that is a much more compelling intro than what we get with this book. And it also tells you who Miss Savage is before she's on the page. Next couple of things are going to be spicy. Trash and Christian characters ain't edgy. This isn't me saying, don't do it. You can't do it. You shouldn't do it. But this is me saying, making your Christian characters so outspoken and then they love a book about adultery and they're also the punching bag of the group just isn't edgy. It's cliche. Especially when your characters are already stereotypical. Also, I had to laugh that the bad guy was bad guy coded by liking Ayn Rand and Nazi Germany. Like, really, dude? Your bad guy coding is so cliche. Which, you know, if you leaned more into satire, I could have believed it by going, yeah, he's making a mockery of this. No, because James Harris didn't have a personality. He didn't have motive. He didn't have anything. So, bad. Mommy issues. Grady? We need to have a talk. Between constantly bringing up Miss Mary smelling like piss, the way all of the women are presented in the book club, calling housewives all smart, dear, but understimulated, because there ain't no way you can stimulate at home without a vibrator, if you know what I mean, and the weird descriptions of pubic hair pretty much every time someone is naked. I don't want to go Freud on you here, but I'm reading some very loud mommy issues that need therapy. Or Mommy ends up upside down in a bathtub with blood draining down her neck and Grady getting down to his skivvies to carve her up the right way. Think about it. Some especially bad prose that I wanted to bring attention to. Like, there are a ton of bad prose in this book, but there are some that really stood out to me. Number 1, oh, Lord Jesus, Wanda said, and she belched loudly, filling the living room with the stench of her stomach acid. The frick is this description? Quote, all right, she finally said, used to doing what people in authority told her. This is just an example of this book having been in limited third person, but switching perspectives to read someone else's thoughts. Bad writing should have been worked out in editing, because this is when Patty is talking to somebody and says, hey, can you go do this thing? Switches to that person and say, okay, and she's used to taking orders. Stop it. Stop it. Where's your editor, Grady? Quote, She strained to listen over the sound of blood throbbing in her ears. Her pulse thumped in her wrists. Her breath rasped in her nose. For me, this was weak tension building. The physical descriptions are generally weak when Grady tries to do them. His tension descriptions are weak, but I realize that I'm also really harsh on this because of how I wrote Bodymore. And at the very least, even when I don't win in contests, my rubrics always compliment my descriptions. I recognize that is a strength that I have, even if I'm weak in other things. And so I didn't think that I was a descriptive writer. Apparently I am a descriptive writer. And so that stands out to me. Quote, "Then Grace saved the day." So there are a couple examples of this where Grady would broadcast what was about to happen right before it happened from this weird third perspective and of him. And it's not necessary. And it's been happening in Will Jordan's book as well, but it happened a couple of times in Grady's, and it's so unnecessary. It can be cut out entirely. Again, where is your editor? From page 1, not even the prologue, but the introduction and the prologue, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grady specifically thought he was clever. Maybe that's not him, but that's the feeling that I got. Then by the time I was in chapter 36, where it was the book club in the hospital talking about killing James Harris, and they were like, "We're planning," and they literally in text were talking to each other, oh, we're a bunch of middle-aged women planning to murder a man in the sterility of a hospital. The feeling of lol, I'm clever permeated the whole thing. The lack of editing and things such as the ghost, but also stuff like Miss Green not knowing where she got the photo from at the top of the page and then saying, "Miss Mary gave it to me, but I don't know why" at the bottom of the page, also should have been clapped. Like, I don't know what happened on the editing floor with this book. But it was trad published, so like, what do you want? Briefly, I did want to say, rape and sexual assault are cheap horror. It added nothing to this book and feels like a cheap shot added to horror novels for extra spooky and shock value especially. It's cheap, it's ineffective, and if you use the elements for shock value rather than giving them meaning and purpose in a story, then you're a bad writer using gimmicks to cover up the smell of your nasty book. That's just a PSA for a lot of people, since I see how often rape is used as a shock gimmick. I see you. I'm calling you out. You're not edgy. The dreaded villain monologue. Yes, we have one here. I'm not saying it, never do it, they can work, but James's villain monologue was not only cringe, it made no sense since he had no motive. Figure out what your characters want and make them follow through. Don't use a villain's monologue to clean up the mess that you're too lazy to figure out for a character and you're too lazy to write in the rest of their story. I'm so sick of seeing this where it's just done as the author cleaning up the mess that they don't want to fix in the rest of the book because they can't be bothered to read their book a second time. Like, if you don't even like your own book, why the frick should I pay you for it? Also, you broadcast your villain's dumbness by not only monologuing, but having them unnecessarily sit on the floor after being defeated when they know that they can escape and they should escape because they're going to get cut into pieces. James had no reason to wait for those women for hours to come back to him and cut him up, but Grady held him down because that's barely what Grady likes to do. But the holy hand of Grady just pushed into the book and shoved James down and held him to the bathroom floor while those ladies took care of Patty. Because he's just such a gentleman that he will intervene in his own book to make sure his plans don't get messed up. Truly pathetic. All of it's really pathetic. And if you do this, you should feel bad. The sex scene. So I've had a couple of spicy videos, and they may or may not, some more may or may not come after this with a discussion topic about sex and sexuality in books, but sex is being so unnecessarily inserted into books nowadays for little reason beyond dealing with mommy issues, personal titillation, and people thinking that they're being edgy by inserting graphic sex into every orifice they possibly can. There's artfulness in including certain types of sex scenes. Then there's being an exhibitionist who gets off on thrusting your junk in people's faces for no benefit but your own to go, ha ha, made you read that. I'm going to read you a sex scene from this book, and I'll tell you where I would cut it off and then let you make your own decisions based on the whole rest of the scene. "One day, it'll be Blue's turn," he said. "But for now, I'm the family friend who helps you put your life back together after your husband dies. Everyone will think that we just naturally felt a powerful attraction, but you'll know the truth. You gave up your pathetic, miserable, broken failure of a life to accept your place at my feet. I'm not some doctor or lawyer or rich mommy's boy trying to impress you. I'm singular in this world. I am what you people make legends from. Now, I've turned my attention to you.
When I'm done, I'll adopt your children and make them mine. But you've brought them one more year of freedom. Do you understand?"
"Yes," Patty said.
James Harris stood and walked up the stairs without looking back. "Come," he said over his shoulder. After a moment, Patricia followed, only pausing on the way to unlock the deadbolt on his front door.
That's where this could have ended, right there. Here was the rest of this extraneous scene.
In the darkness of the upstairs hall, she saw white solid walls all around her, each one a closed door, and then she saw a black hole in the entrance to a tomb. She walked into the master bedroom. James Harris stood in the moonlight. He had taken off his shirt. "Strip," he said. Patricia stepped out of her shoes and inhaled sharply. Standing barefoot on the cool wooden floor made her feel naked. She couldn't do this, but before she could stop herself, her hands were already moving to her back. She unzipped the dress and let it fall to the floor and stepped out of it. Blood rushed and flowed to parts of her body that were dry, leaving her lightheaded. Her head spun, and she wondered if she would faint. The darkness seemed very close around her, and the walls seemed very far away. A fever seized her as she unsnapped her bra and shucked it off, then kicked her clothes into the corner and threw her brassiere on top. She felt the cool air of a stranger's house on her bare breasts and hips and belly. Through the window, she heard some families let out mindless cheer, barely audible, like the shore roaring and seashells or something half-imagined carried on the wind. He pointed to the bed. She walked over to it and sat down. He stood before her, outlined dark in the moonlight. His broad shoulders and narrow waist, his thick thighs and long legs, the strong jaw, the full head of hair. She found where his eyes would be and saw a faint shimmer of white in the darkness. She maintained eye contact with him as she leaned back on the bed, feet still on the floor, and spread her legs for him, and felt the cool air of the house kiss her sex. The air caressed her curls and made them unkink. He knelt between her legs. Everything in her life funneled down to this moment. She watched as his jaw moved in a way that she'd never seen before. He looked up from between her legs and put a hand over the bottom of his face. "Don't look," he said. "But," she said. "You don't want to see this," he said. She reached out and gently moved his hand away. She wanted to see everything. Their eyes met, and it felt like the first honest moment their eyes ever shared. Then he dipped his head down, and his face opened all the way, and she saw darkness come crawling out of his mouth. He was right. She didn't want to see this. She leaned back and looked up at the smooth white painted ceiling, and his breath tickled her pubic hair, and then she felt the worst pain she'd ever experienced, followed by the greatest pleasure.
So I don't see anything added to this situation by continuing all of that. It's not even well atmospherically described to me. So, but then again, this is at like whatever it is, 80, 90%, where I'm just like, I don't care. I don't freaking care. I was done with this 200 pages ago. So there's that. But let me know what you think of that entire scene, and if you thought the second half was necessary after the first half where she locked the door. Because personally, I'm just kind of sick of seeing gratuitous sex or sex scenes that don't need to be in books. And I feel like I've been subjected to too many gross books this year that I'm actually getting physically ill. So I accept that I'm also being kind of personally sensitive to this issue. Next thing, PSA, a lack of seeing value in life does not make you badass. I feel like I need to say this. It was in a recent video. I will say it again. Blood does not make you badass. The story lacks heart, and I get no sense of love for anyone or anything in this book. Grady hates humanity and degrades every type of person in here, from the ivory towers that are his New York house. Honestly, it's gross. But I feel like this is something that specifically needs to be heard by more people writing depressively written contemporary fictions where badass women don't even think about the death they've wrought, and their psychopathy is supposed to be empowering or something. It's not. Reality check. I'm not convinced that this book isn't Patty being an unhappy housewife who had a psychotic break, cheated on her husband, and then murdered the man so that Carter wouldn't find out. Then she called for divorce. Change my mind. Patty's insane, and Carter deserves better. He won't get it because she's a psycho, but that's where I'm at. My final thoughts on the book, because we are finally here. Thank you for sticking with me through it all. But final thoughts, I can't blame Blue for hating Patty. Grady, get some professional help, please. You seem like you need it. I'm so tired of books written in malice. But those are my thoughts. That was my experience. Looking forward to yours down below. I know that I got pretty spicy and passionate because this book pissed me off so much. More so the author than the book, because the book is only as good as the author allows it to be, and let's not get into another rant. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Have you read this book? Will you read this book? Be daring. I'm not going to say whether you should or should not read this book, because I know a bunch of people who enjoyed this book. Well, I also now know at least 2 other people who did not enjoy this book. So take it as you will. To each their own. Everyone has a different experience, and I would love to hear yours. With that said, thank you so much for watching, for sticking with me. I hope there was some takeaway that you could get from this. And with that said, have a great weekend and don't die.
Hello, boomers! My name is Yanananana. How are you feeling today? In case you didn't know, I'm a YouTuber from Nide, a small town in eastern Ukraine. My family has never really understood what I do in the woods, but all I've ever wanted is to make a better life for us all. Papa always comes home from the mines dirty, angry, and tired. It's a necessary evil to do your job and be in a place that you don't want to be. But I've never wanted to spend my life doing exactly what was necessary of me. Everything changed for me when a couple of Americans appeared at my door. They said they wanted to sponsor my channel and handed me military-grade explosives. Can you believe it? Military-grade. The lights will be incredible going forward. With this help, my videos will be next level. I just hope they are as they say, and this isn't some kind of trick. I mean, what would there be to gain? Boris says people are simple. Everything comes down to money and power. And Alex tells me ignorance will not save me from trouble. I understand where they are coming from, but I do not like to think that way. There is more to life than a cruel of superficial goods, hatred, and destruction. Anyway, I do not like where this video is going, so I will see you on the explosives field. Boom, boom, boom. Salute.